Easter Sunday, 1975. What should have been a joyful holiday turned into a nightmare in Hamilton, Ohio. 11 family members, mothers, fathers, children, all killed in less than 5 minutes. And the most shocking part, the killer was someone they trusted, someone sitting at the same dinner table. Stay with me, because as this story unfolds, you'll see twists that are darker and more chilling than anyone expected. James Urban Ruppert was born on March 29, 1934, into what appeared to be a normal American family. But behind closed doors, his childhood was being destroyed by the very people who should have loved and protected him. His father Leonard was known throughout Hamilton for his violent temper, turning their home into a war zone where fear ruled every day. But even worse was his mother Charity, a woman whose favoritism would plant the seeds of future tragedy. Charity had wanted a daughter, not James. She made no secret of this disappointment, telling her younger son repeatedly that she wished he had never been born. While she showered endless love and support on his older brother Leonard Jr., James grew up feeling like an unwanted burden in his own home. The house was filled with chickens because of Leonard Sr.'s business ventures. James developed severe allergies to the feathers, causing him constant discomfort and breathing problems. When he begged his parents to remove the chickens, they refused. His suffering meant nothing to them. As James grew older, the psychological abuse only intensified. Charity would compare him constantly to his successful older brother, making it clear that Leonard Jr. was everything James would never be. She told him he was worthless, stupid, and a disappointment to the family name. These words carved deep wounds in James's developing mind, wounds that would never properly heal. When James turned 12 in 1947, his father died of tuberculosis. For most children, losing a parent would be devastating, but for James, his father's death seemed to make everything worse. Leonard Jr., now the oldest male in the house, quickly stepped into the role of family tormentor. He took every opportunity to humiliate and harass his younger brother, continuing the cycle of abuse that their father had started. At school, James had no friends to provide comfort or support. He was a loner who struggled academically, not because he lacked intelligence, but because the constant stress and abuse at home made it impossible to focus on learning. The psychological pressure became so overwhelming that at age 16, James made a desperate decision. He took bed sheets from the house and tried to hang himself in his bedroom. The suicide attempt failed, but it marked a turning point in James's life. Something inside him broke that day. He stopped trying to improve his situation and accepted his role as the family failure. After high school, James enrolled in college with hopes of proving himself worthy of his family's love. But after 2 years, the pressure and his own feelings of inadequacy forced him to drop out. Meanwhile, Leonard Jr. graduated with a degree in electrical engineering and landed a prestigious job with General Electric. The contrast between the brothers became more stark with each passing year. Leonard Jr. bought a beautiful house in Fairfield, married a wonderful woman named Alma, and started building the perfect American family. James, meanwhile, remained unemployed for most of his adult life, living in his childhood bedroom and borrowing money from the very people who had spent years telling him he was worthless. But the cruelest blow was yet to come. Leonard Jr. didn't just succeed in career and life, he also stole the one person James had ever truly cared about. Alma had once been James's girlfriend. He had loved her deeply and believed they had a future together. Watching his successful brother marry the woman of his dreams sent James into a spiral of rage, jealousy, and depression that would consume him for decades. As the years passed, James found comfort in only two activities: drinking alcohol to numb his emotional pain and shooting guns. His collection of firearms grew steadily: a .357 Magnum, 2.2 handguns, and a .22 rifle. He became an expert marksman, spending countless hours at shooting ranges around Hamilton. Neighbors who saw him practice thought it was just a harmless hobby. They had no idea he was developing skills that would soon be put to horrific use. By 1975, James was 41 years old and still living with his elderly mother, Charity. The woman who had spent his entire childhood telling him he was worthless was now dependent on him for care and companionship. But instead of appreciating his presence, Charity had grown tired of supporting her unemployed alcoholic son. The final straw came when Charity delivered an ultimatum that would push James over the edge: find a job and start paying rent, or move out of the house. James had lost his life savings in the devastating 1973 to 1974 stock market crash and had no money to pay rent. The threat of eviction terrified him. Where would he go? How would he survive? At 41, with no job skills and no friends, homelessness seemed like his only option. But James was beginning to formulate a different solution to his problems, a solution so dark and twisted that it would shock the world. On March 29, 1975, James's 41st birthday, several witnesses saw him at the Great Miami River in Hamilton. He was shooting at cans with his guns, practicing his aim with deadly precision. That evening, James went to the 19th Hole Cocktail Lounge, a local bar where he often went to drink away his troubles. The next morning was Easter Sunday. Charity called Leonard Jr. and invited his family for Easter dinner. Leonard Jr. arrived with his wife Alma and their 8 children: 17-year-old Leonard III, 16-year-old Michael, 14-year-old Thomas, 13-year-old Carol, 12-year-old Anne, 11-year-old David, 9-year-old Teresa, and 4-year-old John. The children immediately ran outside for an Easter egg hunt, while the adults prepared to spend a relaxing holiday together. James slept late, nursing a hangover from his night of heavy drinking. By the time he woke up at 4 p.m., the entire family had moved inside to continue their celebration. Charity was in the kitchen making sloppy joes while Alma helped with the preparations. The children were playing games and laughing together. Leonard Jr. was relaxing after the big family meal. It seemed like a perfect family gathering. James joined his family briefly, observing the scene with an expression that no one thought to analyze too carefully. Then he excused himself and went upstairs to his bedroom. When he came back down, he was carrying something that made perfect sense, given his well-known hobby: his guns. James told everyone he was going to the shooting range to practice. This seemed completely normal to his family. They all knew about his love of target shooting. But as James reached the front door, Leonard Jr. made a casual comment about James's old Volkswagen car. To most people, it would have been meaningless small talk between brothers. But to James, already on edge about his failures in life, already consumed with decades of resentment, already desperate about his housing situation, those innocent words felt like one final insult from his successful brother. In that moment, James made a decision that would change 11 lives forever. Instead of leaving for the shooting range as he had announced, James turned around and walked back into the house. The time was exactly 6 p.m. Outside, church bells were ringing throughout Hamilton. their joyous sound about to become the perfect cover for the horror that was about to unfold. What happened next would take less than 5 minutes, but would haunt the community of Hamilton forever. James raised his guns and began firing at the people he had shared a home with, shared meals with, shared a lifetime of memories with. The shots came in rapid succession. His first targets were the people in the kitchen: his elderly mother Charity, his successful brother Leonard Jr., his former girlfriend Alma, and 3 of the children who were helping with dinner: David, Teresa, and Carol. James shot them with cold precision. But James wasn't finished. He methodically moved to the living room where the remaining children were playing. Anne, Leonard III, Michael, and little 4-year-old John had no time to run or hide. James shot them all at close range. He showed no mercy to the children, no hesitation about killing his own flesh and blood. In less than 5 minutes, James had fired 44 shots total. 40 of them found their targets. The Easter Sunday celebration had become a massacre that would go down in history as one of America's worst family murders. But here's where the story takes an even more disturbing turn. Instead of panicking, running away, or immediately calling for help, James did something that revealed the true nature of his crime. He sat down in the living room, surrounded by the bodies of his family members, and waited. For 3 full hours, James sat in that house of death, listening to the silence where laughter had been just minutes before. Blood was soaking through the wooden floors and dripping into the basement. The smell of gunpowder mixed with the aroma of the sloppy joes that would never be eaten. During those 3 hours, James considered killing himself. He held his gun to his head multiple times, but each time he decided against it. After 3 hours of sitting with his victims, James finally made a phone call. But he didn't call 911 immediately. First, he did something that would later become crucial evidence against him. He changed his blood-splattered clothes and cleaned himself up. Then, he calmly dialed emergency services. "There's been a shooting," James told the dispatcher in a steady voice, as if he were reporting someone else's crime. When Hamilton police officers arrived at 635 Minor Avenue just minutes later, James met them at the front door. The officers later said they were struck by how calm and normal he appeared. This short, mild-mannered man with thick black-framed glasses didn't fit their image of a mass murderer. But as the officers entered the house, they encountered a scene that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Blood covered the floors in both the kitchen and living room. Bodies were scattered throughout both rooms, adults and children alike, all victims of the same methodical killer. There was almost no sign of struggle in the house except for one overturned trash can, indicating how quickly and unexpectedly the attack had occurred. The family had been completely caught off guard. As news of the massacre spread through Hamilton, the tight-knit community was devastated. Everyone knew the Ruppert family as good, decent people. Leonard Jr. was respected in his job at General Electric. Charity was known as a devoted grandmother. But even more shocking was learning that quiet, helpful James, a man neighbors had known their entire lives, was responsible for the murders. He had always seemed so harmless, so mild-mannered. How could this gentle man have committed such unspeakable violence against his own family? James was arrested and charged with 11 counts of aggravated murder. Despite his reputation as a quiet, cooperative man, James immediately became uncooperative with police. He refused to answer questions about his motive or explain why he had killed his entire family. But James did make one thing crystal clear from the very beginning. He planned to plead not guilty by reason of insanity. This announcement puzzled investigators. If James was truly insane, why had he been so methodical during the killings? Why had he changed his clothes after the murders? Why had he waited 3 hours before calling police? His actions seemed more calculated than crazy. As James's case went to trial, his defense team assembled an impressive group of psychiatrists and psychologists. They painted a picture of a man driven to madness by decades of abuse and psychological trauma. The experts testified that James suffered from paranoia and delusions stemming from his terrible childhood experiences. 2 prominent psychiatrists concluded that James had been unable to control his actions during the shooting because of his mental illness. The defense argued that years of beatings and psychological abuse had finally caused James's mind to snap on Easter Sunday. They portrayed him as a victim of his own family's cruelty, who had simply reached his breaking point. But the prosecution had a very different theory about James's motive, one that was far more disturbing than temporary insanity. District Attorney John Holcomb believed that James had committed the most calculated family murder in American history. The prosecution's investigation had uncovered evidence that James had been planning the murders for weeks or possibly months. First, James had inquired about purchasing gun silencers when buying ammunition in the weeks before the murders. When asked why he needed silencers, James claimed they were for target practice to avoid disturbing neighbors. But investigators believed he was actually planning to muffle the gunshots during the murders. Second, there was James's behavior on the day before the murders. Witnesses had seen him practicing his shooting at the Great Miami River with deadly precision. The prosecution argued this wasn't casual target practice. It was rehearsal for mass murder. Third, there was the timing of the actual murders. James had opened fire at exactly 6 p.m. on Easter Sunday, just as church bells throughout Hamilton were ringing for evening services. The loud bells had drowned out the gunshots, preventing neighbors from immediately calling for help. This suggested careful planning rather than spontaneous violence. But the prosecution's most shocking theory was about James's ultimate motive. They believed he had killed his entire family for money.
He murdered his family to collect his brother's $300,000 or so in life insurance.
The prosecution argued that James had developed an elaborate scheme to avoid the consequences of mass murder, while still collecting the financial rewards. By pleading insanity, he hoped to spend a few years in a comfortable mental hospital before being released as a wealthy man who had literally gotten away with murder. James's first trial ended with 2 out of 3 judges finding him guilty of 11 counts of aggravated murder. However, a mistrial was declared when it was discovered that the judges hadn't been properly instructed. A second trial was ordered in Findlay, Ohio. Once again, the prosecution presented their case that this was premeditated murder for financial gain, not insanity. The jury found James guilty on all 11 counts of aggravated murder. He was sentenced to 11 consecutive life sentences, but James wasn't finished fighting. In 1982, during an appeal hearing, his defense attorneys managed to convince a new jury to partially accept his insanity plea. The jury found James not guilty by reason of insanity on 9 of the 11 murder charges. He was found guilty of only 2 murders, those of his mother Charity and brother Leonard Jr. This partial victory meant that James was sent to a mental health facility instead of regular prison, just as the prosecution had predicted he wanted all along. At age 48, James was incarcerated at the Franklin Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio, believing he had successfully manipulated the legal system. But James had made one crucial miscalculation in his plan. Even though he had partially succeeded with his insanity defense, he never received the inheritance money he'd killed for. The families of his victims fought successfully in civil court to prevent James from profiting from his crimes. Every penny of the $300,000 fortune was distributed to other family members and charities, ensuring that James would never see a dollar of his blood money. Years passed, and James remained confined to various mental health and correctional facilities. He was granted parole hearings in 1995, 2005, and 2015, but each time his release was denied. The parole board cited his poor behavior in custody and overwhelming community opposition to his freedom. On June 4, 2022, James Urban Ruppert died of natural causes at the Franklin Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio. He was 88 years old and had spent 47 years in various forms of custody, far longer than he had ever anticipated when he planned his Easter Sunday massacre. James had gambled that he could murder 11 people, including 8 children, and still walk free with their inheritance money. Instead, he spent nearly half a century confined to institutions, never touching a penny of the fortune he had killed for, never experiencing freedom again. Like and subscribe to our channel and share with others so everyone gets awareness.